Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest event of our Economic Research Emerging Tech Network, or EARN. The San Francisco Fed has a long history of being early students, studying topics that are probably going to change the economy and the world eventually, but we want to be there first. And the EARN network is just the latest development, latest center in that journey. The EARN network is devoted to looking at emerging technologies and then considering how they're going to change our world. Discussions like the one we're having today will help us better understand the possibilities, the risks, and rewards of the latest advances in AI and other innovations. And these types of conversations ultimately understand the choices that we will have to make to ensure that the technologies that we're seeing actually have the impact we want on our economy. Today's program is going to focus on generative AI. Now, this is a technology that has drawn tremendous attention. It is usually positioned between the enthusiasts and the doomsayers. But actually, where we end up on that continuum will depend on the choices that people make. After all, AI is just a tool, like any other tool, and people are the decision makers. So we hope this conversation today will help you think about these issues as we shape the future of technology and our world together. So let me turn to our distinguished speakers. We are honored to welcome Michael Schwarz, Corporate Vice President and Chief Economist at Microsoft, and he will be joined by Sylvain Leduc, Executive Vice President and Director of Research at the San Francisco Fed. I look forward to the conversation. I hope you do as well. And with that, Sylvain, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Mary. Michael, good morning. It's great to have you with us today to talk about your work on GenAI and productivity. Before we dive into the issues, I'm kind of curious about your career path. So you get a PhD from Stanford in economics at the business school. You then joined the Harvard economics department as a microeconomist. And then in 2004, if I get this right, you left to join Yahoo, which in those days was still pretty novel. So I'm just curious about what attracted you to the tech sector.
So actually, tech sector attracted me. So at that point, nothing attracted me to the tech sector. So my academic specialty is marketplace design and auction theory and decision theory. So I wrote a paper about sponsored search advertisement in the very early days of the sponsored search advertisement. And that was a completely theoretical paper using auction theory and lots of formulas and theorems. And it turned out that that paper was quite useful for designing sponsored search auctions that was rapidly becoming an enormous industry. So suddenly search engines wanted to hire me. And I thought, okay, I will get a job in tech for 4 years, make some money, and go back to academia 4 years later. Well, that was about 20 years ago.
You never know where things are going to lead you, basically. So this is great. So to launch the topic today, we at the Fed, we're really interested in this topic. Maybe give a bit of background why we're interested. Maybe it's obvious, but maybe not. I mean, growth, of course, GDP growth, potential growth is super important for us. We need to assess what's the speed limit of the economy if policymakers want to calibrate policy right so that we achieve price stability and maximum employment. And so you can see how that varies both with how many hours people are working, but also how productive are people. And so, you see this big boom in the mid-90s to 2004 in terms of productivity, and that impacted growth in the economy with the IT revolution, all the innovation that were done in the innovation in communication sector, for instance. And so the question, and since then, we've seen a step down in productivity growth and a step down in growth. And our projection here are that that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. But GenAI, of course, could disrupt that and boost productivity and then boost output growth. And so it's important for policymakers to know that. And the question is, are we going to be in a situation like the mid-90s or not? And so you've done a lot of work with your team at Microsoft trying to tease out the impact of GenAI on productivity. And so it would be great to hear more about what you guys have done.
All right. Well, so let me start out just to kind of set up the discussion um, with two different views of AI. One view, how economists would see AI, and the other view, how computer scientists would view AI. And from the point of view of economists, AI is just technologies like any other technology. So every new technology makes it possible to accomplish what was not possible before. It may mean doing things that were entirely impossible, or it may simply mean doing things that were completely possible before, but doing them faster and cheaper. And in this respect, AI, from economic point of view, is just like any other technology. It makes things possible that weren't possible before, makes things faster and cheaper. That's it. That's all. From computer science point of view, AI is a completely different thing. AI is technology like no other technology. And AI sheds light on what is to reason, and it opens up all kinds of philosophical questions of what does it mean to be intelligence? Is it a new life form? So from an economist's point of view, none of that is a concern. It's just a technology that makes us more productive, that's all. So I like both views. For me personally, AI changed my personal philosophy. I used to take a lot of pride in being able to be articulate and intelligent, and after talking to Bing Chat a little bit, I realized that Bing Chat is more articulate than I am, and that maybe there's more to being a human than being articulate and knowledgeable and intelligent, and it kind of becomes obvious. And frankly, I think that 99%, maybe 90% of people know perfectly well that there is a lot more to being human than being articulate and intelligent. I think it's that people who are overeducated tend to kind of derive too much value, perhaps, and too much identity from being articulate and intelligent. So I think AI is also a humbling experience for many of us, where we go like, oh, interesting. Philosophically speaking, that our intelligence doesn't define us at all. But let's go back to economics. So what does AI actually do for productivity? So let me start with a story of what I think is probably one of the most impressive applications of AI. That's GitHub Copilot. It's a Microsoft product that is used by software engineers. It's very popular among software engineers. It's basically an AI agent, an AI assistant that helps software engineers to write code. And it's extremely, extremely successful. 96% of people who use it say that they're faster with repetitive tasks. 88% say that they're more productive. And 74% say they're focusing on more satisfying work. It's just the boring stuff could be taken care of by AI. And then when we look at actual experiments, where we look at the data on telemetry data for engineers who are starting to use AI and compare it to how much they were producing before and after, we see that the number of pull requests goes up by about 15%, which is, loosely speaking, you can interpret as 15% increase in productivity, which is actually an enormous increase in productivity, because if you think about it, and probably most of you don't know what the life of a software developer is, but actually software developers only spend about maybe 25% of the time writing code. The rest of the time they're sitting in meetings, going through privacy reviews, talking to product managers. So that 15% increase in productivity is huge, given that there's also a huge overhead that GitHub Copilot does not help with sitting in the meetings. But we have another Copilot, Teams Copilot, that does. So this is really an impressive productivity increase. And I think there are a lot of people who go, oh my God, this is what would happen with jobs for software engineers as this technology improves and as 15% becomes bigger and bigger number, would we see mass unemployment among software engineers? And obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, but I'll definitely bet against it. And let me share a personal anecdote. When I was born, my mother was a software engineer, and she was programming in a language that's now forgotten by humans called assembler. That's the language in which computers operate. Computers still know assembler. When modern programmers write software, the compiler translates it into assembler. But humans don't need to know assembler anymore. And guess what? When higher level programming languages were invented, the productivity of software engineers didn't improve by 15%. It probably improved by 10x or 100x. Everything is incredibly slow in assembler. So we have seen those enormous productivity increases in productivity of software engineers back half a century ago. And guess what? As those productivity increases came about, the demand for software engineers went through the roof because sure, they became a lot more productive, but that means that it was a lot more demand at a much lower price. So I think with software engineers, I'm not too worried about them. Obviously, different occupations may be impacted differently, and it's hard to predict. So let me give you another example of a copilot, a service copilot that is used by customer service agents. There, again, you have quite significant productivity improvements. We see about 9% that people are essentially able to handle about 9 to 12% more cases. They are more satisfied, and also most junior agents benefit the most. They require a lot less assistance and advice from senior agents because they can ask Copilot a lot of the time. That's enough.
So this is interesting in the services, for the services industry. I mean, from a macro angle, you want the productivity to impact the services sector because it's such a big sector. Right? So if we want to have a macro impact, you want that technology to spill over into services. And so this is, this is encouraging to the extent that it can improve the productivity of services workers. So this is good. One thing I thought interesting when I going through your research, and I didn't quite realize before, there's so much enthusiasm about GenAI right now, and people are hungry for results. And you know, it's so new that it's hard to get empirical results. And so people have done lab experiments. And so you've done both. So clearly, like it's better, it's more interesting to do it in the workplace. But so what do you think like the main difference is by comparing workplace environment to lab environment?
So we do both. We do actually we do three types of things. We do like lab experiments. We do genuine field experiments where some people in organization get Copilot, some people don't, and we compare the patterns of the work. And then we do something in between where we work with a customer to design an experiment where they create kind of tasks for people to do, but those tasks are basically taken from the typical tasks that they do, and then they experiment on their own employees performing those tasks. So why would we do that instead of just giving Copilot to some of the employees and observing them? And the answer is, well, you want, there's a lot of benefit sometimes in separating what Copilot actually does very well. So sometimes there could be a very useful insight, right? You have certain list of tasks, you see how much Copilot helps with each of those tasks, and say, oh, for those tasks, it performs really fantastically, or for those, maybe not so much. So you can isolate things, you can see them cleanly, and you can measure things cleanly. And the kind of noise to signal ratio is a lot lower because you have treatment group and control group doing sort of comparable things, as opposed to when you kind of experience in the wild, the amount of noise is enormous. You randomly assign Copilots to some people but not to others, and then what do you observe? You observe how many emails they sent. Okay. You observe how many emails they read. Okay, so are they more productive? How could we know? Well, some things you can see from telemetry data. For example, one of the kind of fun factoids and important findings, people spend about 3% less time reading email. And so you think, why would that be? Like, that's crazy. Why would you read fewer emails? And like, wait, it's actually true. It's not statistical fluke. It's highly statistically significant. There's a thread summarization feature. So you come to work in the morning, and there's this 20-email thread. And instead of reading that thread, you say summarize it, and you see the summary, and you go, oh, I got the gist of it. So suddenly you don't spend any time on that thread, and either you realize it's not important for you, or you realize, oh, there's some important information, but it's already in the summary. And sometimes you obviously read it. And by the way, those 3% by itself would be, just that would be enough to cover the kind of cost of Copilot, those time savings. But of course, there's a lot more, but a lot of it you could not measure, right? Or it's difficult to measure. Maybe your emails became much more concise, and they're much more helpful for your colleagues, and they need to spend a lot less time with the back and forth. But how would I know that from telemetry data? So it's much more difficult to measure things.
So an interesting thing with the technology is the adoption rate also, like how fast this thing is diffusing. And so if you ask companies about this, and people have done surveys of company usage of GenAI, it's surprisingly small, about 5%. There's heterogeneity in this number across industries, but on average 5%, so really small. But then if you ask workers, it's kind of different. So there's a survey that was done on worker usage of GenAI, and about 40% of the respondent basically answered that they use it a lot, maybe like 10% about at least every week. And then there's this gradation about this number, but workers use it at work and outside of work. And so that's kind of an interesting thing about this thing. Even if you don't provide it as a company, workers know where to find it, and they notice it's useful, and they'll use it. But there's a fair amount of heterogeneity in these numbers. So they've broken down these survey responses by age, by demographics, by skill, by education. And you can see that those who really use it are people that are highly educated with an advanced degrees, and so that's kind of important, this heterogeneity, because it tells you if maybe lower skilled workers are using it less. So there's kind of this sense of discrepancy maybe. So I think you've looked at this also in your results, because you have so much data in some of the experiments you conducted. So if you could talk a bit about the heterogeneity in the results that you find I think it's interesting to know that.
So first, I think that this observation that a lot more employees report using AI than there are employers using it, reporting using it. We have even seen some of that in our experiments. In some of the experiments, we give kind of treatment group one task, control group the other task is kind of clean environment in some sense. And then what we realized that some people in the control group, people who weren't given the Copilot, they just went online and used Bing Copilot to complete the task faster, right? I wouldn't call that cheating, right? Because nobody told people in the treatment group you're not allowed to do that. But apparently some people figured out that yes, they can. So that's kind of consistent with people using it. I think that in general, kind of when this kind of employer unauthorized usage of AI, I don't think it does much for productivity, because I think that in order to make AI work for your business and for your organization, it has to be embedded appropriately in the processes. So I think that when people kind of use it here and there to edit an important email or to do something of the sort, I think that that's obviously much more limited and limiting than when an organization thoughtfully implements something. So more to the question of kind of heterogeneity, I know I kind of punted a little bit on that. So you're absolutely right. We see enormous amount of heterogeneity on every level. So, okay, one thing that's definitely true about AI, just like about any other technology, it ain't magic dust, right? So you couldn't just take AI, sprinkled it on your employees, and say, well, they
Not
grew
that simple.
10% productivity increase right there. It just doesn't work like that. It actually doesn't work like that with any other technology, right? When internet was invented, you couldn't just give internet to your employees and say, oh, now the productivity grows. When computers became available, you couldn't just toss computers at your employees and say, oh, now things must grow, right? You have to be very, very thoughtful about how you implement things, right? And for starters, you also need to use it, right? So there are many, many stories from the early days of computing when an organization would spend $1 million to buy the computer, would have a dedicated room, and then it would just stand there, and nobody would use it because nobody knew how to use it, right? So that story repeats itself with every technology, and AI is certainly no exception. And that's what we see. You have some organizations giving copilots to the employees, and some employees use it a lot, some not at all. And over time, people are kind of getting hang of it, and there's an adoption curve. More and more people start using it. But obviously, it's not helping you if you're not using it. There are plenty of organizations where there are plenty of people who have it available but are not using it much. The speed with which people are learning and adopting differs enormously, also not just across people within organizations, but across organizations. And there's a very simple reason for that, right? If you, just like in the early days of computing, you can have two organizations, both of them bought 100 computers, one of them doing wonderful things with them, the other not doing nothing. The role of leadership is extremely important, right? So in some organizations, you have trainings, you have leaders showing with personal examples how they use it, you have encouragements to use it, you have group learning sessions, and so on and so forth. And in some organizations, you don't, and it makes a huge difference in adoption rate.
So that's interesting because the training is important. And when you look at surveys of firms that I just mentioned before, that's where they spend a lot of time. A lot of resources is devoted to training. What's interesting is despite the training, you find big improvement in productivity. Because often you would think that the training would delay a little bit. Like people have to learn, and so it would take time before the use of the technology would translate into productivity gains. But you're finding gains that are pretty quick in a sense.
So with GitHub Copilot, yes, in part because software engineers are very good technology adopters. I think that really helps.
Right. So again, we're back to the heterogeneity a little bit.
That's right. That's right.
So we had a lot of questions online about like the disruptive aspects of GenAI and who's going to be impacted or not. And I'll just put a chart up here about the labor share of income, of national income. And basically it measures how much people are compensating compared to productivity gains ultimately. And so, if workers were more productive and compensation was rising in line with the productivity, the labor share would be constant. But as you can see from the chart, the labor share has been on a declining trend for the better part of like the last 30, 40 years. And so there's kind of this worry, right, that the technology will be disruptive, maybe shed workers, and maybe the labor share is going to decline even more, or maybe not. It's a little bit difficult to say about this. So just in terms of skills here, like where are you finding workers with lower skills being positively impacted by GenAI or not?
So I think it very much depends on a specific use case. So for example, for security copilot, we see the biggest gains for very junior security analysts. Basically, you have a product that could take like a high school graduate who doesn't know anything about how to be security analyst, and suddenly that person could perform a number of tasks that normally would be performed by a college-educated junior security analyst. And for kind of more senior black belt security analysts, it's a much less game-changing, much less helpful product, right? So for other products, for example, GitHub Copilot that helps software engineers, in some of the studies, in some of our studies, we saw that the more junior software engineers were helped the most. In some of the customer conversations, we hear the opposite, that they experienced that some of the customers reported, at least, that the more senior software engineers benefited the most. Then I realized that both actually could be true at the same time. You look at percentages and absolute amounts, maybe you improve junior guys by 15% and you improve senior guys by 10%, but if senior guys make double the money of junior guys, in absolute terms, the senior guys would be helped more, but in relative terms, junior guys. But I think it very much depends. But I think it depends also in another thing that's extremely important. AI, just like any other technology, is not just kind of an individual productivity improvement, right? You could use it for individual productivity improvement. You organize your work the same way you always did, and people use AI and they are slightly more effective or significantly more effective doing the same thing. But generally, you would see much better results if you actually rethink how you do your work, if you rethink your processes to incorporate AI there, and then you restructure your jobs, and the whole nature of the workplace and nature of jobs may be changing. And that, of course, happened with every single technology. That's not at all unique to AI.
Yeah, so like for just in terms of that, actually, reorganizing your workplace. I'm sure people, and we have many business people here. What are the challenges that you think you've encountered in implementing AI for these businesses? Like when the workplace is changing, we talked a little bit about training, but what are the other challenges that people should be aware of?
So first, let me kind of go back to training for 1 second. So usually, kind of when we hear the word training, a lot of the time we are kind of imagining, learning a new skill. Like, now I know how to tie my shoes, and before I did not know, and that's a new knowledge that I gained. But a lot of things related to new technologies, and not only to AI, is about habits rather than actually learning a specific skill like tying your shoes. So let me give you kind of an example from yesterday. So I was at a meeting, and we were kind of gathering feedback on something. And then I spent like 10 minutes writing down the action items and writing down kind of the summary of feedback and distilling it to like 5 items. And then I was like, I'm a moron. I could have clicked record with Copilot, and it was an in-person meeting, so I wasn't recording it with Copilot, but I easily could have. All I had to do is click one button that was in front of me, and then I had to just type one word, summarize the feedback, come up with action items, and it would generally give a much better summary than what I am capable of. And I just forgot to do that. And I like half my time is spent on various AI-related things, and I still basically lost an opportunity to save myself 10 minutes.
Right. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is collaboration. So like these tasks were individual tasks, I think. But you have also products that help collaboration across teams in different parts of the world that speak different languages. And that's really important, right? Because like a lot of it, we have product fragmentation. We have people that are distributed in teams across different areas, often maybe don't speak the same language. And so if you have translating help from GenAI, that can make people a little bit more productive, being able to collaborate more. And that probably is an important part of having more cohesive teams, of course.
So we actually did some experiments where we used kind of Copilot at Teams to see how it impacts teams where there are people in different countries speaking different languages, different cultures. And it's actually a great equalizer. It helps people who speak with an accent, who are harder to understand, who sound less articulate. So we did experiments, and basically people who are using Copilot, they perceived those foreign colleagues as being more intelligent and more competent, because when you have Copilot, you can see kind of the summary of what they said, and then you read it and you go, oh, that was good, right? When you hear that person speaking with a heavy accent and not being very articulate, you're less impressed. So it's an equalizer for people who are kind of otherwise less likely to be fully understood.
Of course, we have no accent, me and you, so we're good on that front. You know, Michael, we're already out of time. It's awful. We could speak for sure another half hour. I just wanted to leave people with this thought here. There's kind of this chart about GDP per capita that one of kind of well-known economists at Stanford, Chad Jones, has put up in the mid-90s. Kind of this intriguing finding that if you look at it over time, from the late 1800s to today, you know, it fluctuates, but it kind of grows at a more or less constant rate over time, about 2% a year. So it basically tells you that despite all the productivity improvement that we've seen, you know, it's not a bad guess to think that, yeah, it's going to grow at 2%. So it's intriguing because, and maybe GenAI is going to change that, right? Maybe GenAI has the potential to change this curve so that we see a big pickup. Or maybe it's the fact that we need GenAI just to stay at 2%. So, you know, we don't have those answers, but it's great to keep this in the background. I just wanted to thank everyone online for joining us today, and thank Michael for your perspective. It's really valuable to us to hear that. Please join us on December 4th for another event that we will have with David Otter, he's going to talk about his work on expertise, artificial intelligence, and the future of work. You know, we're just looking forward to have you join us at that time. Thank you for joining.